Hello, welcome to part 2 of how to drive a manual. When you are driving and go to change gears, the first thing you do is push down the clutch pedal. That actuates the clutch system, which allows you to smoothly change the engine speed in relation to your car's forward motion. The input shaft on the transmission is how that happens. The clutch works by connecting and disconnecting your engine to the input shaft so that you can change gears and increase your speed. To relate this to everyday life, think of the clutch pedal as a sliding dimmer light switch. When you are not pressing the pedal down, it's equivalent to the lights being on, basically 100% brightness, and the engine is transferring all of its power to the transmission. As you press the pedal down to the floor, it's similar to sliding the dimmer down until the lights are off, and your transmission is completely disengaged from the engine. Of course, this isn't a perfect comparison, but I'm trying to get you to visualize the motion and what's happening inside. Also, when you have the clutch pressed down to the floor, the car will roll similarly to when it's in neutral. But remember that the transmission is still connected to the drive shaft, so all the internals of the transmission will still be spinning at whatever speed the car is moving at. Now let's take a look at the clutch components and see how each piece interacts to give you that smooth transition that you're hoping for. All these parts are dirty, so forgive me for not being in full partial, that way I can touch everything properly. Let's check out the main components. First up, we have our clutch pressure plate. Then we have our friction disc. Then we have our throwout bearing. These just make sure everything kind of spins smoothly. Usually when your mechanic tells you this is the problem, it's because it was rattling. It makes a lot of noise when they get old. And then our pilot bearing. This is another pilot bearing depending on the diameter of the hole that the thing goes into. It's all technical, you don't have to worry too much. Last up, we have the flywheel. That's solid metal, it weighs like 45 pounds, very heavy. The whole point of it is just to keep momentum when it's spinning, that way your engine doesn't stall as easily. The way the clutch works is basically the same to how your car's brakes work, but the opposite. Now what do I mean by the same but the opposite? Let's break it down, pun intended, to see how each system works individually. You're in town and driving down the road. Up ahead of you, the light turns red. To slow your car down, you gradually press down on the brake pedal. When you press the pedal down, a piston pushes fluid out of the master cylinder. The fluid travels through your car's brake lines and enters another piston on each of your brake calipers. From here, the caliper squeezes the brake pads and slows your car down. There's a quick overview of the brake system. Now let's look at what's actually happening at the wheels. Imagine you're back in town on your way to the store. As your car is driving down the road, your brake rotor, which is connected to the wheels, is spinning at the same speed that your wheels are. The caliper stays in place as our stationary piece, and the rotor is the piece spinning with the wheels. Keep that in mind as we come back to it later. As far as physics go, we have the rotor spinning, and when you press down on the brake pedal, the caliper squeezes the two brake pads together, which are on opposite sides of the rotor face. The pressure from the caliper causes friction against the spinning rotor, and then the car slows. This also heats the brakes up, which is why you don't want to ride your brakes when going down a long hill. The brake pads are made of carbon, and over time this friction wears them down, which is why they need to be replaced every few years. At this point, I think we're ready to go back to our clutch components. First, we have the clutch pressure plate. As the name suggests, this provides the pressure that holds everything together, similar to how the caliper provides pressure to squeeze the brake pads. When you press the clutch pedal down, this is what the pedal is actuating. In a similar fashion, the pedal moves a piston that pushes fluid into another piston, but this one is instead located in the transmission, instead of the wheels. The pressure plate is directly bolted to the flywheel, which is your engine output. So the flywheel and the clutch pressure plate both spin at the same speed as the engine at all times. We then have the friction disc. This is the part of the clutch that connects to the transmission input shaft that I talked about earlier. This disc goes in between the flywheel and pressure plate, and these friction pads on it allow it to slide with some force against the engine rotation to allow the changing of gears. This little circle of springs in the middle also adds an extra layer of cushion in case you're a little too rough with it, like when you're first learning. Now here's where the same but opposite comes in. When you look at your brakes, you have the metal rotor in the middle, spinning with the speed of your wheels. On both sides of your rotor surface, you have the carbon brake pads, which squeeze the rotor and apply friction to slow it down, so it eventually matches the speed of the caliper, which is stationary. On the clutch system, you instead have your rotor, which is now made out of those carbon brake pads, and on both sides of your rotor surface, you have the metal flywheel and metal pressure plate surface, which now squeeze against your rotor to slow it down or speed it up, so it eventually matches the speed of the engine. For learning purposes, we can say that the input shaft is always spinning with your wheel and brake rotor, and your goal is to smoothly change its speed to match your engine speed. Equivalently, if you jam down your brake pedal, your car lurches and you choke yourself on your seatbelt. In the same way, you want to move your clutch pedal smoothly so that the same thing doesn't happen when you're changing gears. Now imagine your car is stopped at the red light from before with the engine running. Your wheels are stationary, and subsequently the brake rotor is also stationary. Unlike the brake caliper, which is always stationary, your clutch equivalent caliper, the flywheel and pressure plate, are rotating at your engine idle speed. But because your car is stationary, when you press the clutch pedal down and shift the transmission into first gear, your transmission input shaft is also stationary. So now, in order to get your car into first, you have to release the clutch pedal and allow the rotating clutch pressure plate and flywheel to speed up your transmission shaft using the friction disc so that the two speeds are matching. Once your car is rolling, your goal during every gear shift is to match the rotational speed of the engine with the rotational speed of the transmission input shaft. And that's pretty much it for the mechanics behind operating a manual transmission. Now, let's get to the part where I show you how to do it. Thought that would have worked like in the movies.